Hey everyone. Thanks so much. So I'm going to give a research update today on progress made in the last year and a half on consensus protocols. I'm not going to talk about economics or incentives, but I am going to talk about consensus. The talk is going to be a bit technical. I removed a lot of the most technical bits, but it's still a bit technical, so, you know, try to keep up. Don't feel bad if you can't. So here's the plan. I'm going to tell you about this a proof relating a local property to a distributed property of consensus. And then I'm going to give a process for generating consensus protocols, give you a couple examples of protocols that are generated according to this process, and then show you how I can change validators, like nodes in consensus protocols, without actually using consensus, and provide some concluding thoughts, maybe some takeaways. Here we go. So, consensus protocols are fundamentally about nodes making the same decisions. Different nodes doing the same thing, even though at different points on the network. They have latency issues, they don't see the same thing. They have different views of the network, but still somehow we need to make them make the same decisions. Consensus safety is this property that actually consensus protocol following nodes make the same decision. Consensus safety is like the most fundamental thing that has to be true about a consensus protocol for it to be somehow meaningfully consensus. But consensus safety is a non-local property, it's a distributed property. It says something about a property of an event that happens across the network, right, in 2 different locations at least. Decisions, by the way, that I'm talking about here are kind of final decisions. They're not ever reversed. In the way that Bitcoin blocks, for example, could be reversed if there were a longer fork. So Bitcoin never makes decisions, right? It only ever kind of adds blocks and hardens them and reinforces the history. But there's never a point, like at 6 confirmations or 7 or 8, at which it suddenly becomes completely final, with like a couple minor exceptions, like genesis blocks and checkpoints. But still, Bitcoin is useful as a consensus protocol. People use it to make decisions in the same way across the network. So Bitcoin has a local notion of safety. Bitcoin safety basically says after 6 blocks, we're good, right? Basically, and that's a very different kind of property than the safety property that I talked about earlier in terms of the consensus safety. But still, somehow, this is going to be related to the fact that you and I agree on the block that, or each have in our blockchains, the block that's 6 confirmations in. So there's this thing called, I'm going to call it an estimate. Basically, it's not a decision, it's something that's kind of a guess that maybe you'll change your mind about later. So it's kind of like imagine if consensus protocols, instead of deciding things, just kind of guessed. And then I'll call them estimates. And I'll call an estimate safe if that estimate will never change. Like, this is a local property that an estimate won't change. And so basically we have this result, where basically we have a few properties, namely that any 2 nodes will ever receive the same set of messages, regardless of the order in which they receive them. If any nodes can send each other any messages that they've ever received, and if nodes only ever make decisions on estimates that are safe, then we have a consensus safe protocol. And this is like a really kind of foundational theorem. It basically says that we can relate this local property of an unchanging estimate to this global property, distributed property of consensus safety if we have these conditions, that nodes can send each other messages, nodes who receive the same set of messages have the same estimates, regardless of the order they receive the messages in, and nodes only make decisions on safe estimates. So I'm going to give a little proof here. So if I'm a protocol following node, and you're a protocol following node, and my estimate is safe, and you send me all the messages you've ever received, I won't change my estimate. That's just kind of by the definition of estimate safety, which says that my estimate won't be revised. So if whatever you tell me, I won't change my mind, is implied by estimate safety, right? And also similarly, if your estimate is safe, if I send you all the messages I've ever received, you won't change your mind because your estimate is safe also. However, at the end of this process, we will each have seen the same set of messages, namely the collection that is both of the messages we've ever seen together at the start, right? So like the union of our views. But having seen the same set of messages, we should each have the same estimates. And so we each have the same estimates, but we each didn't change our estimates, meaning that initially we must have had the same ones. So the fact that our estimates were initially safe, combined with our ability to send messages to each other, and the fact that we would choose the same estimates if we were to see the same thing, means that we had the same estimate at the beginning. And this completes our proof. This basically says that if we have these properties and our estimates are safe, then they have the same estimate. So this is cool because we can use this to talk about and relate this kind of confirmation count in Bitcoin with the fact that we have distributed property. Basically, like, you send me all the blockchains you've ever received, and I send you all the blockchains I've ever received, and we're both safe at 6 confirmations. Well, that means that like neither of us will be able to send each other blockchains that don't include that block. But the thing that's more interesting to me and to this presentation and to kind of maybe research in consensus is that we can generate consensus protocols in order to satisfy this proof. And it's going to be nice and relatively easy to think about because estimate safety is a local property, whereas consensus safety is a distributed property. And so we can just achieve the local property in this, given these conditions that we can send messages to each other, that we choose the same messages. Then we just get consensus safety for free. We get this difficult distributed property almost for free if we can achieve this local estimate safety property. And so, you know, all of this is kind of placed against some assumptions about the number of faults in the network and the synchrony in the network, because like it's kind of impossible to have consensus safety and 100% Byzantine faults. And for example, Bitcoin isn't safe in asynchrony, and all that stuff kind of didn't factor in all the words that I just said now, but it's kind of in the background. I just wanted to mention that in case anyone is getting concerned that I'm not talking about network synchrony or Byzantine faults. So now I'm going to talk about this process for generating consensus protocols by satisfying this proof. So there's a few things. We have to define what the protocol messages are. We have to define how nodes choose estimates given that they have a bunch of protocol messages. And we have to implement something called an estimate safety oracle. It's basically something that's going to detect safety. It's going to locally be able to tell us based on the messages that we receive whether we actually have this property called estimate safety. And if we do these 3 things, then we have a consensus protocol. It's pretty amazing because like it's not supposed to be that easy. So I've done this so far 5 times with different data structures. The first one I did was a bit. Just like, deciding, agreeing on a 0 or 1. And then the second one, I wrote as an ordinal number there. It's really an ordering, right? Just like a total order on some set. And then I replicated a blockchain, and then a rewrite system, and just recently I was able to replicate an integer using this process. And all of the protocols that I kind of derived in this way have a bunch of stuff in common, which I'm going to cover now before I show you the binary consensus protocol and the blockchain consensus protocol. So they all of them have messages of the following form. They have estimates, which are just like we were talking about, like a guess for the value of the consensus. They have a sender, so like they say who sent the message, and there's like and then there's a justification. The justification basically will be a set of messages which somehow is used to show that this estimate isn't invalid. It's not in a legal estimate. So we're going to have some set of nodes, some fixed set of nodes, and they have weights. And the weights have a tie-breaking property. I used to have some equations here, but I think that they got lost in translation. Basically, weights are real numbers that every node has. So like one node might have weight 2 in the consensus, the other one might have weight 3. And the tie-breaking property means that like there isn't a node with weight 5 because that would like let you have a tie between the weights 2 and 3 and 5. Right? So like all of the sets of nodes have to have different weights for these protocols. And that just gets rid of an edge case and makes things a little easier. Finally, all the protocols that I've specified, the estimator, which is this kind of deterministic function of sets of messages, are only a function of the latest messages that they've received from other validators, and a function of the weights. A protocol message is valid if the estimate is the estimator of the justification, and only Byzantine nodes would ever make invalid messages. Another thing that all these protocols have in common is that all correct nodes are expected to never unseed things. Like if you made a message and in your justification had a latest bet from a certain validator, a later message that you make has to include that bet or a later one. And also you have to refer That's a Byzantine fault and represents a way to attack consensus protocols. So we're almost done with the exhausting bits. Protocol states are sets of messages, and this is for all these protocols. That's all the protocol state that there is. Whether you're talking about a local view or a global view, all there are is protocol messages, and updates to the protocol just correspond to the addition of new protocol messages into these sets of messages. So we're really talking about a very simple state for this protocol, just a set, and a set of protocol messages, of this form: estimate, sender, justification. So that's cool. And now I'm going to share with you a safety oracle that actually works for all of those protocols. And this is a really simple safety oracle that really will hark back to your consensus knowledge if you have studied consensus protocols in the past. So there's three properties which, if some set of validator V holds and that set has more than half the weight, we're going to have consent. We're going to have estimate safety, which means that if we decide on that, we're also going to have consensus safety, which is kind of the fundamental property of consensus protocols that we want. So the properties are: each of the validators in the set have a latest message with this estimate that we're trying to say is safe. Each of them see from each other a latest message with that estimate. And there's this third property. It's a little bit more complicated. It basically says that in the view which we're trying to say is safe or not. So sorry, let me take a step back. The safety oracle, it will take an estimate and a set of messages and try to decide whether that estimate is safe. So it'll look in that set of messages and try to see whether there's any way in that set of messages that it can show a message to a validator in order to make two no longer true, which is to say that there's a new latest message from one of these validators that another one of them could see that disagrees with the estimate that we're trying to say is safe. So if all the validators in V agree with the estimate that we're trying to say is safe, see from each other an estimate that we're trying to say is safe, and can't see from each other a different estimate, and this represents more than half the validators, then we have consensus. And also, very interestingly, we're going to have fault tolerance. We're going to have fault tolerance of 2 times their weight minus 100%. So if you have 66%, then you're going to get this 33% fault tolerance number that we normally are used to. But if you were to have, say, 80% of the validators have this property, then we'd get a fault tolerance of 60%. And if the weight is less than 50%, then the oracle says that we're not safe. And so somehow that I'm claiming is going to reliably tell us if our estimate is safe. But fundamentally, though, the only thing that really perfectly always detects safety is something called the ideal adversary. The ideal adversary basically is able to search all protocol features for a protocol feature where the estimate changes. And if it's able to find one, then the estimate isn't safe because it's possible for it to change, rather than just directly a definition. And so any safety oracle that thinks you're safe when the ideal adversary succeeds in attacking is an unreliable safety oracle that should not be used because it won't be able to give you safe decisions all the time. So it's really important that whatever safety oracle we come up with is consistent with the ideal adversary. And my plan is that I have a proof that this oracle that I just gave you is consistent with the adversary. I.e., if the adversary ever has a set of validators with those properties, they will fail to attack. And they will actually need this number of faults that I gave you to attack successfully. So, now that we're done with the difficult work of setting up, giving you some properties of these protocols, I'm going to give some examples, because actually most of the specifications is done now. So for the binary consensus, we have messages that look like this. We have a bit for the estimate, we have sender, and then a justification, and the justification is kind of just the latest messages seen by that sender. And then basically we have an estimator, which is this function that takes protocol messages and says whether we should believe like 0 or 1, which all nodes use the same one of, right? Because two nodes who receive the same messages choose the same estimate. In this case, we will choose 1 if a majority by weight have 1 in their latest messages and choose 0 otherwise. So it's a pretty simple estimator, it's just a majority vote, essentially. And so we have, again, I'm going to demonstrate this to you. First I'm going to explain the visual representation. So this represents 3 validators. This validator's made 3 messages, this one's made 2, and this one's made 3. These arrows correspond to membership and the justification. So the justification of this message includes that one and that one. Justification of this one includes that one and that one, and so on. And then the number here, 0 or 1, is the value of the estimate. So, you know, so here we have this guy's 0 because that has to have more weight. So here we go. This is the thing running. Sorry, real quick. The green means they have estimate safety. So let's just watch that again. Just random tag, like random message propagations. Eventually, they realize through their safety oracle that they're safe. And if we were to do rounds, we get something that looks like a normal consensus protocol, like the kind of that we're used to. Quickly, kind of all agreeing on 0 and 2 rounds. So that was cool. Blockchain's a little more exciting because rather than just agreeing on a bit, we're going to agree on a whole blockchain and therefore be able to replicate a virtual machine. Now we have messages of the form pre-block, sender, justification, which includes the latest messages and the last finalized block. Kind of notably, like, this is not a well-founded definition. The real definition is kind of requires like 3 lines, but I think this is good for communication sake. Here we go, and we have a 4-choice rule. It's called the greedy heaviest observed subtree. Basically, we start at the last finalized block, and we pick the child of that block, which has the most weight. Then we pick the child of that block, which has the most weight, and so on. And here the representation is a little more complex. The dotted lines mean membership and justification. Solid gray line is a pre-pointer, so the pre-block pointer. The solid blue lines represent the validator's latest 4-choice rules, and then the red line is kind of our 4-choice rule given the fact that we're watching this. So if we were to run that 4-choice algorithm, we would choose this red line. And so now we're going to watch this thing go. And now, check it out. So now we have some fault tolerance over here. These can tolerate 1 node, now they can tolerate 2 faults. And as the color changes, the number of faults that we tolerate. These are 3 faults we can tolerate. Those are 2. Those are 1. These guys can tolerate 4 faults now. And so you kind of see these are finalized, right? These will never change, and we kind of know that. And therefore, deciding on them would be safe. It would be consensus safe. And as you can kind of see, you know, it forks around the top. Sometimes, like the red thing, like it will. You know, first for now, we're leaving that blockchain, and then all of a sudden, everyone's we'll fork around, right? But we never fork on these finalized blocks, so these ones are safe. And so we kind of see the forkiness of the blockchain, and also how it becomes safe, and how we can make these decisions. Here's maybe the most interesting thing: if you actually make the blocks in a blockchain, you get to the stage where every additional message finalizes an additional block and adds actually fault tolerance to multiple blocks, right? So like every additional message increases the fault tolerance of a number of blocks. This represents a tremendous amount of efficiency in terms of the amount of finality that we can get for every additional message. Something that's kind of unheard of in traditional consensus protocols, where we kind of have to have like 2 times the number of nodes and messages for every block. Here, we only really have at the end 1 message per block for finality, up to 4 out of 5 fault tolerance. That's what this black is. So this is incredibly efficient in terms of the number of messages required for consensus. So, validator rotation is our consensus. This is pretty cool. Well, basically, we're going to have a very similar thing to before, only in the justification, we're additionally going to have the weights. The 4-choice rule, almost exactly the same, only instead of using the global weights to choose between the children, we choose the local weights. And the really cool thing about this, because the 4-choice rule is deterministic, because the choice of children is independent at every height, and the OR safety oracle works just as before, we satisfy our safety proof. And therefore, we just really shortly, really simply can see that it's safe for us to change the weights just according to the proof that I gave you at the start of the talk. So, concluding thoughts. Basically, traditional consensus protocols are really complex normally. They're derived to satisfy this distributed property, which is kind of difficult to reason about. Estimate safety protocols, on the other hand, are derived to satisfy a local property, but we have this really nice relationship between them, and so we can just use estimate safety protocols as consensus protocols. And this makes it, easy for us to come up with new consensus protocols, which is amazing because consensus protocols are really notoriously difficult. And it kind of unifies our picture of blockchain consensus and traditional consensus. So we have like traditional consensus protocols, like multi-paxos, are based off of doing consensus multiple times, once for every block. Blockchains, on the other hand, they string blocks onto each other and reinforce each other in a way that is like foreign to traditional consensus protocols, and therefore actually can achieve consensus much more efficiently in terms of the network overhead. So basically, and the other really cool thing is with these protocols, actually, I didn't actually have to have a fault tolerance threshold in the protocol. The decision could be made at the edges, right? I didn't say when nodes had to make a decision. You could make a decision after just consensus, or you can make a decision after it tolerates all but one fault. It's kind of up to you, right? Whereas traditional consensus protocols have a fault tolerance threshold in the protocol. The best thing about this, though, is that it's really simple theory. It is educational. It lets us understand consensus in a new and interesting way. But actually, the interesting thing is I never said anything about when nodes were supposed to make messages. I didn't have to, right? All the stuff I gave was flexible, right? It doesn't matter what message passing order there is. And so, there's a bunch of things I didn't talk about, like liveness, right? Which has to do with when nodes are making messages, whether that actually achieves safety. Unfortunately, I didn't have that much time to talk about it, but there's still work to do. But I hope that you're excited about this like I am, because I think it represents like a simple way to build really efficient consensus protocols. So, thanks so much for everything.